It all began the night Daniel's colleague vanished, leaving nothing but a chair tipped over and a single envelope on the polished office floor. The kind of envelope that seemed ordinary until it hummed with a weight no one could explain. He picked it up, fingers trembling slightly, and immediately noticed the label, "For your eyes only. Do not open in company of others." The moment he broke the seal, a folded note fell out, the handwriting eerily precise, deliberate, and strangely familiar. "Trust no one. Observe yourself first. The archive watches more than you imagine." Daniel's heart hammered as he realized this wasn't a joke, prank, or mistake. It was a warning, a message from someone who knew something that the rest of the world didn't, and perhaps wouldn't ever. Beside the note was a small data drive, sleek and black, unmarked except for a single, blinking light that pulsed like a heartbeat. He slid it into his laptop, an irrational fear creeping up his spine as encrypted files began to populate the screen. Each folder was named with dates, names, even precise hours, all detailing observations, psychological evaluations, and what appeared to be experiments conducted in secret. Daniel scrolled through the first file, and the cold logic of the content made him pause, eyes widening as he recognized behavioral patterns he himself had unknowingly followed. Every decision he had made, every hesitation, every subtle act of trust or betrayal over the past 6 months had been recorded, analyzed, cataloged. The more he read, the more the room seemed to shrink around him, the light of the monitor reflecting off his wide, anxious eyes. He could feel the past pressing against him, the choices that had seemed private now laid bare like a public spectacle, and in that moment the line between autonomy and manipulation blurred beyond comprehension. A sudden sound behind him, a click, subtle but distinct, made him spin in his chair, heart racing. No one was there, yet the sense of being watched intensified, a feeling that had started to creep over him in the days prior, but now arrived in full force, undeniable. He remembered conversations he thought were casual, emails he assumed were ordinary, all now appearing orchestrated, a web he was trapped within and hadn't seen forming. The drive contained not only records but videos, footage captured in moments he couldn't remember anyone filming. One file, titled Observation 07, The Choice, displayed him in a hallway, unaware, interacting with colleagues in ways that seemed innocent until viewed through the cold, analytic lens of the experiment. The labels suggested it was part of a social compliance study, yet the subtlety of control was unnerving. The archive didn't just observe. It influenced, nudged, tested. He closed the laptop briefly, pressing his hands to his face, trying to absorb the enormity of what he held. Lena, his closest friend at work, texted suddenly, "You okay? You left early yesterday and didn't respond." Daniel froze. Could she be part of this too? He hadn't noticed the small ways people's behavior might have shifted around him, and now doubt gnawed at the foundation of trust he had always taken for granted. Every interaction, every smile or frown, every encouragement or critique could have been manipulated, recorded, or interpreted to measure his compliance, his willingness to conform, his capacity for ethical compromise. He sent a quick reply, "I'm fine, just tired. Let's meet later." Yet even as he typed, he questioned whether sending that message was a decision born from his own agency or a predicted, calculated action the archive had already anticipated. The envelope, the note, the drive, they were not just warnings, they were invitations. He understood now that the disappearance of his colleague was not random. It was the first visible sign that the experiment had reached a critical stage, that someone, somewhere, had decided he was next to be measured, pushed, and observed. Anxiety, disbelief, and curiosity tangled within him, creating a tension that made it difficult to think clearly. Yet one undeniable urge emerged above all. He had to know the truth. He had to follow the threads, even if they led to dangerous places, even if the moral cost became unbearable. Hours passed as he explored the data, discovering psychological manipulations hidden in plain sight, subtle prompts inserted into emails, coded instructions embedded in casual meetings, triggers placed in everyday decisions, all designed to provoke, influence, and record human behavior under pressure. He began to notice patterns, recurring tests of trust and compliance, decisions recorded and analyzed down to microexpressions, pauses, and tone variations. The archive was not merely a repository. It was a machine designed to bend human behavior subtly, to observe the moral and ethical limits of its subjects. Daniel's hands shook as he realized the experiment extended beyond him, beyond his office, beyond the city even. The notes, videos, and folders painted a picture of systematic manipulation on a scale he could hardly comprehend. The archive was everywhere, unseen yet intimately connected to countless lives, measuring, testing, judging. And then he found a folder marked simply Subject 0. He hesitated, breath shallow. The first video began, and he saw himself, eyes wide, expression uncertain, as a voice off-screen asked questions he didn't remember being asked, pushed him into moral dilemmas he couldn't recall. The chilling part was not that the footage existed. It was the precise accuracy of the reactions, the way the machine had predicted each choice he would make, each hesitation, each micro-decision that revealed character and morality. He leaned back, chest tight, staring at the screen, understanding that everything had changed. There was no turning back. The knowledge alone had altered him irrevocably. The envelope's note pulsed in his mind like a mantra. Trust no one. Observe yourself first. The archive watches more than you imagine. Daniel knew that the next step, whatever it entailed, would not simply be about survival. It would test the limits of conscience, ethics, and human resilience. Outside, the office lights flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Lena, this one short and cryptic. Meet me. We need to talk before it's too late. Every instinct screamed caution, yet something deeper, more urgent, compelled him to move, to act, to step into a reality that had always existed alongside his own but remained hidden until now. The world as he knew it had fractured in a single night, and as Daniel grabbed his coat, laptop under one arm and drive in the other, he felt the first true weight of the experiment pressing against him, a force invisible yet undeniable. The archive had begun, and he was already inside. The next morning, Daniel's apartment felt unfamiliar, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were observing him, leaning closer to scrutinize every move. He barely slept, haunted by fragments of the recordings, the precise timing of questions and micro-expressions he could not recall. His phone rang incessantly, notifications blinking across the screen, each one setting off a ripple of suspicion. Lena insisted on meeting at a cafe on the outskirts of the city, a place chosen, she said, for its discretion, yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that even here, their conversation might be intercepted. When he arrived, she was already there, sitting with her hands clasped tightly, her gaze flicking to the door every few seconds. Daniel, she whispered as he slid into the seat opposite her. You have no idea how deep this goes. The archive isn't just an experiment. It's a network, controlling, observing, predicting everyone involved. Her voice trembled, though she tried to appear composed. I've seen files, people I know, their choices, their fears, even things they've never told anyone. And now you. Daniel's pulse quickened as he absorbed her words. The enormity of it pressed against his chest like a physical weight. What do you mean, me? He asked, trying to keep calm, though the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Lena slid a small tablet across the table. On it were screenshots, surveillance data, timestamps. There he was, in meetings, in corridors, in casual interactions with colleagues. Every action recorded, every conversation monitored, analyzed, interpreted. They've started influencing behavior, Lena said quietly. Subtle prompts, emails, even office memos that seem normal, but they push you toward decisions they want. It's manipulation on a scale I can barely comprehend. Daniel scrolled through the files, stomach twisting, recognizing decisions he had thought were entirely his own. Suddenly, the casual coffee shop felt like a theater stage, the other patrons actors in a play whose script he had never read. Panic mingled with a strange clarity. The reality he had relied on was a construct, monitored and nudged. We need to find the source, he said finally, voice low but firm. We need to know who's running this and why. Lena nodded, her jaw tight. I thought I could avoid it, stay unnoticed, but you've been marked. They know you've accessed the drive, and that makes you a variable. We have to move carefully. Their plan was cautious but deliberate. Trace the anomalies, identify surveillance patterns, gather evidence of the archive's operations. As they left the cafe, every glance, every passerby seemed laden with potential observation. Each step on the pavement was a reminder that trust was no longer reliable, that anyone could be a participant in the experiment, willingly or not. That evening, Daniel returned to his apartment to find his door ajar, a subtle shift that immediately set off alarms in his mind. The apartment smelled faintly of antiseptic, unfamiliar yet clinical, as if someone had been there, leaving only traces behind. He moved cautiously, checking rooms, noting that nothing seemed taken, nothing overtly altered, yet a faint residue of intrusion lingered in the air, the silent declaration that his personal space had been violated. Panic surged again, but alongside it came a grim determination. Whoever ran the archive had underestimated the effect of awareness. Knowledge, he realized, could be weaponized as much as obedience. Over the next days, their investigation yielded both clues and hazards. Anonymous emails arrived, encrypted and unreadable without the proper software, each containing fragments of behavioral studies, questions designed to test decision-making under moral and social pressure. They realized the archive's reach extended beyond mere observation. It was predictive, preemptive, capable of subtly nudging choices before the subject consciously understood them. One evening, as Daniel analyzed data, a knock came at the apartment door. He froze. Lena urged him to ignore it, but the knocking persisted, insistent, almost rhythmic, like a countdown. He peered through the peephole. No one. Just the empty hallway, shadows stretching unnaturally long. The sense of being monitored intensified. He understood that psychological pressure was not a side effect, but a deliberate tool. Sleep became impossible, concentration fragile. Every decision, from eating dinner to replying to a text, felt like part of the experiment, as if each micro-choice was measured, evaluated, and stored. Even friends and family who had seemed reliable now inspired doubt. Subtle glances, ambiguous phrases, casual questions, all could be instruments of influence. Daniel and Lena realized that to confront the archive, they would have to embrace risk on every level. They began setting traps, deliberate choices designed to gauge the archive's responses, testing boundaries while maintaining secrecy. But every probe revealed not clarity, only deeper complexity. Each discovery brought new hazards. Colleagues who acted suspiciously, surveillance devices hidden in plain sight, digital traces leading nowhere or to dead ends. The social fabric itself became a labyrinth of ethical and psychological dilemmas. Should they manipulate in return or remain passive? How much could they ethically risk to uncover the truth? The moral weight was crushing. One night, Daniel discovered a video file with the timestamp of the previous evening. He had assumed he was alone, safe in his apartment, yet the footage showed someone, or something, entering, leaving traces of observation, recording his every movement. Lena insisted they move the data and themselves to a secure location, but in doing so, the network of observers might detect their activity, raising the stakes exponentially. Arguments and debates punctuated their planning, revealing fractures in trust and differing tolerance for risk. Daniel felt the ethical boundaries of human action stretch and twist in ways he had never imagined. Yet a grim necessity pushed them forward. If they did not act, the archive would continue to expand, unchallenged, manipulating, predicting, and controlling lives beyond their understanding. By the end of the week, the scope of the experiment became undeniable. The archive had infiltrated not just offices, homes, and digital networks, but entire social structures. Every ally, every casual acquaintance, every routine human interaction had the potential to be a test, a nudge, a calculated measure. Daniel realized that the only way to maintain sanity was to embrace uncertainty, to operate in the gray zones of morality, strategy, and personal risk. As Lena and Daniel prepared for their next move, an email arrived, subject line blank, message empty except for a single phrase. The first choice was yours, the next may not be. It was a subtle shift in tone, a warning that the experiment had escalated. The archive was no longer merely observing. It was orchestrating, drawing them deeper into a web where the lines between freedom and control, trust and betrayal, morality and necessity were increasingly indistinguishable. And in that moment, Daniel understood with chilling clarity that the path ahead would demand choices unlike any he had ever faced, decisions that could fracture his ethics, endanger others, or forever alter the trajectory of his life. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the hidden mechanisms at play, of the psychological currents rippling through the lives of its citizens, and Daniel, holding the drive and the evidence, knew that retreat was no longer an option. The experiment had begun, and the stakes had just multiplied. Daniel and Lena had spent days navigating the shadows, mapping the subtle manipulations, testing the limits of the archive's reach, yet the more they uncovered, the more complex and dangerous the web became. Every lead seemed to branch into another layer of control. Every ally carried the potential for betrayal, and the city itself felt like a maze constructed to obscure truth. It was during one of these late-night surveillance sessions that the unexpected happened. A figure appeared on Daniel's encrypted chat window, anonymous yet unmistakably familiar in tone. The message read simply, "I know what you're facing. I can help, but we move fast, no mistakes." Daniel hesitated, the memory of previous betrayals and hidden observers gnawing at him. Yet something in the phrasing suggested authenticity, a careful understanding of the experiment's scope. Lena's eyes met his, reflecting both caution and an unspoken recognition that hesitation could cost them far more than trust. They agreed to meet the mysterious contact in an abandoned warehouse on the city's industrial outskirts, a place chosen for isolation, yet filled with shadows that seemed to breathe and shift as they approached. The figure revealed herself as Mara, a former analyst within the organization running the archive, someone who had witnessed the system's escalation and chosen to vanish rather than continue complicity. Mara's knowledge was precise, terrifying in its scope. She described the archive not merely as an observation tool, but as a predictive mechanism, calculating probabilities, nudging behavior, and adjusting in real time to test human compliance, morality, and resilience. She had maintained secrecy, operating outside the system's direct observation, yet her presence here implied that even she was risking exposure by aiding them. "They measure everything," Mara said, eyes scanning the dim interior. "Decisions, hesitation, trust, betrayal. They predict your moves before you even know them yourself. I've seen subjects spiral under pressure, lose their grip on morality, ethics, even sanity. You're not just part of the study, you're a catalyst now, Daniel. Every action you take has consequences the archive already anticipated." The weight of her words pressed against Daniel like a physical force, yet within them lay an opportunity. Together, they began devising a strategy, combining his first-hand experience with Lena's insight and Mara's insider knowledge. They identified a pattern in the archive's manipulations, subtle but consistent. The experiment tested not only immediate decisions, but also the long-term psychological effects of uncertainty, observation, and moral compromise. Each recorded choice created a ripple, influencing subsequent events in ways subjects could never consciously trace. Using this knowledge, they constructed controlled scenarios, deliberately making choices that might confuse or mislead the archive, attempting to carve small pockets of agency within a system designed to remove it. Yet the cost was immediate. Every maneuver demanded careful calculation, patience, and a willingness to endure psychological strain. Daniel found himself questioning every instinct, every impulse, every expression, wondering if each was truly his own or a response to manipulation. The tension reached a climax one evening when Mara presented a file containing a revelation that shook them all. The archive had already influenced key figures in their lives, including Lena, planting suggestions, nudges, even subtly guiding her decisions. The discovery forced Daniel to confront a terrifying question. Could trust exist in a system designed to erode it? The revelation did not fracture their alliance, yet it magnified the stakes. They now had to operate not only against the archive, but also within a network where intentions, loyalties, and emotions were all suspect, constantly evaluated and influenced. This led to bold, calculated risks. They planted false information, created controlled inconsistencies in their routines, and observed the responses, watching for signs of prediction or adjustment. Each success was a small victory, yet every step deeper into the archive's realm heightened the danger. They began decoding the structure of the experiment itself, mapping out the mechanisms by which the organization observed, influenced, and tested human behavior. It was a labyrinthine architecture, each layer interconnected, a system capable of turning ordinary social interactions into moral tests. Daniel's realization was sobering. The archive was not merely an experiment. It was a mirror, reflecting not only what humans did, but what they were capable of under pressure, under surveillance, under ethical and emotional strain. The climax of Act 3 arrived unexpectedly. While cross-referencing files from Mara's archives, Daniel discovered a hidden program, encrypted and deeply buried, that identified him specifically as primary variable. The archive had designated him a focal point, not just a participant, but a subject whose reactions would influence others, whose decisions might guide the experiment's next phase. The gravity of this knowledge was staggering. He was no longer merely responding to manipulation. He had become a linchpin, a fulcrum upon which the experiment's outcomes rested. The team realized that remaining passive was impossible. Action, not reaction, had become the imperative. Mara proposed a high-risk maneuver. Infiltrate the central node of the archive's operations, extract the full set of behavioral patterns, and expose the mechanisms manipulating not just their lives, but the broader social structure. Daniel understood that success meant a chance at reclaiming agency, at striking a blow against the experiment, but failure could mean permanent compromise, exposure, and possibly irreversible psychological damage. As they prepared, Lena and Mara emphasized the moral complexity. Every intervention carried consequences for others, and the line between defense and manipulation blurred dangerously. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility like a physical burden. Every choice, every action, would ripple beyond their immediate knowledge. The night before their planned infiltration, Daniel sat alone in the warehouse, reviewing data, replaying video sequences, and feeling the psychological strain manifest as nausea, tension, and exhaustion. Yet within the pressure was clarity. The experiment had elevated stakes, but the opportunity to disrupt it, to reclaim agency, was now tangible. He realized that the true power of the archive lay not only in observation, but in the moral and emotional control it exerted over subjects. To resist was not simply a matter of skill or stealth. It required profound self-awareness, courage, and ethical resolve. The first fragments of truth they uncovered illuminated a path forward, yet also revealed the magnitude of danger. As the sun rose, casting pale light across the warehouse floor, Daniel, Lena, and Mara exchanged solemn looks, silently acknowledging the convergence of risk, strategy, and morality that lay ahead. The experiment had escalated, the lines between observer and observed blurred, and the moment of decisive action approached. The tension was palpable. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, a reminder that the next step could change everything. And in that charged silence, Daniel understood. The discovery of an ally had not simplified the situation, it had clarified it. The choice before him was no longer theoretical, no longer distant. The archive was watching, predicting, and reacting, and now he, the primary variable, would determine the course of what came next. The days following their discovery moved like a slow-motion descent into chaos. Daniel, Lena, and Mara had begun executing their plan to infiltrate the archive's central node, but each step revealed new layers of danger, new fractures in reality that made every decision feel like walking a tightrope above an endless abyss. The city around them carried on, indifferent, but Daniel could feel the invisible threads of observation pressing against them, subtle manipulations tugging at their choices, shaping the smallest details of movement, conversation, and thought. One evening, as they reviewed the latest network patterns, alarms rang out in the distant building where the archive maintained its primary data hub. Mara's face went pale, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're accelerating the cycle," she said, voice tight. "The system knows we're probing, and it's adapting faster than we anticipated." Panic rose, but action was the only option. They attempted to leave, only to find the streets unervingly empty, the usual hum of life muted, replaced by the sensation of invisible eyes and silent anticipation. Even familiar faces seemed altered, as if brief flashes of recognition or doubt flickered across them. cues that someone, or something, was testing their reactions. Their safe spaces became traps. Daniel's apartment had been violated once more, subtle changes now embedded with a sophistication that indicated deliberate psychological warfare. Lena's hesitation over minor choices, Mara's sudden silences, Daniel's own indecision. They were no longer private. The archive observed, interpreted, and exploited. The first true collapse occurred when Mara's encrypted communication network suddenly went dark. Attempts to re-establish contact failed. Every contingency plan she had prepared was now inaccessible, and the team was suddenly isolated. "We're exposed," Daniel whispered, a cold realization settling in. Lena's eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We knew this could happen," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the weight of that acknowledgement. As they struggled to adapt, allies they had counted on began to vanish. Messages went unanswered, scheduled rendezvous were mysteriously canceled, and those who had previously supported their inquiries now seemed distant or hostile, either coerced or manipulated into silence. Their isolation compounded, creating a suffocating atmosphere of uncertainty and urgency. At the same time, the archive intensified its psychological pressure, sending a barrage of anonymous digital prompts, moral dilemmas, and emotionally charged scenarios designed to destabilize them. Daniel received files showing consequences of choices he had not yet made, scenarios where hesitation or compliance led to irreversible harm. The sense of being observed and predicted became unbearable. Even silence carried meaning, each pause a potential nudge or threat. The collapse reached its psychological peak one night, when Lena was taken while attempting to secure an alternate access point. Daniel and Mara were forced to witness through surveillance footage a kidnapping orchestrated not as random violence, but as a deliberate experiment, a test of loyalty, courage, and ethical boundaries. The realization that the archive could manipulate physical reality as easily as digital signals shattered their remaining illusions of control. Desperation set in. Decisions became moral quagmires. Every choice to act carried immense potential for harm. Every decision to wait risked further loss. Daniel faced the collapse of not only strategy, but also personal conviction. The city, once a neutral backdrop, had transformed into a hostile landscape of observation and pressure, where every human interaction was a potential variable in the experiment, every alleyway a vector of influence. Mara attempted to stabilize them, proposing radical measures to regain access, even at the cost of ethical compromise. Daniel wrestled with the moral calculus. Should he deceive, manipulate, or coerce others to achieve their goals? Could the ends justify actions that would haunt his conscience indefinitely? Amid this turmoil, an unexpected clue appeared, a fragment of a decrypted communication between archive operatives, indicating a potential flaw in the system's predictive algorithms. The collapse, paradoxically, illuminated a glimmer of opportunity. Yet acting on it meant the highest personal and ethical stakes yet. Daniel, standing alone in the warehouse while Mara worked on code to exploit the vulnerability, felt the full weight of his role as the primary variable. Every choice, every movement, every thought could shift outcomes irreversibly. The psychological strain reached an apex. Sleep, food, and focus became luxuries they could no longer afford. His mind oscillated between fear, clarity, and the eerie detachment the experiment seemed designed to cultivate. Finally, with Mara guiding from the shadows of the system, Daniel prepared a decisive move to regain control of the network and locate Lena. The plan demanded infiltration, deception, and unwavering courage. The tension was absolute. Even the simplest errors could render their efforts futile or worse, endanger Lena's life permanently. As they moved toward the archive's central hub, every heartbeat echoed the weight of the collapse that had brought them to this point. The psychological and moral toll was immense, yet in the chaos, a certain clarity emerged. Survival and agency were inseparable from risk and ethical compromise. The final moments before the hub entry felt suspended in time, a convergence of fear, hope, and moral reckoning. Daniel understood that the collapse had not just tested their limits, it had redefined them. The city outside remained indifferent, yet inside the labyrinth of observation, manipulation, and escalating dilemmas, the experiment's ultimate trial awaited. And in that silence, filled with the electric tension of imminent action, Daniel faced the singular truth of the collapse. Everything could be lost, yet surrender was impossible. The archive had pushed them to the edge, stripped away allies, resources, and certainty, and forced them to confront the full scope of their moral and psychological selves. The stage was set for the decisive confrontation, and Daniel, heart pounding, prepared for the moment that would determine not just survival, but the very meaning of agency within the intricate, unyielding machinery of the archive. Daniel, Lena, and Mara had reached the final stage of their plan, standing at the threshold of the archive's central hub, a towering structure of steel, glass, and hidden circuits that seemed almost alive, pulsating with the weight of unseen observation. Every decision up to this point had led to this confrontation. The experiment's manipulations had escalated, the psychological strain at its peak, and the moral stakes impossibly high. The lobby was silent, unnervingly empty, yet Daniel could feel the archive's presence as a tangible force, probing, predicting, anticipating their moves. Security measures were both visible and invisible, physical barriers interlaced with digital ones, behavioral algorithms tracking microexpressions, hesitations, and even neural patterns through implanted sensors they had yet to fully understand. Mara led the way, her insider knowledge guiding them past the most obvious traps, while Daniel and Lena followed, every step measured, calculated, yet instinctively fluid, balancing action and subtlety. As they reached the control center, rows of screens displayed live feeds, data streams, and predictive models, all converging on their movements, every input analyzed in real time. The central console hummed with the archive's intelligence, the culmination of months of observation, manipulation, and calculation. Daniel felt a surge of both dread and determination. The moment of confrontation was now. They began accessing the system, Mara typing rapid commands, bypassing encryption layers, while Daniel scanned for anomalies that could be exploited. The screens flickered, and suddenly, a live feed appeared showing Lena herself, not harmed, but monitored, isolated in a separate secure location. The archive's message was clear: compromise or lose her, test or fail. Daniel's chest tightened. The moral weight of the choice pressed like a vice. Every fiber of his being wanted to act immediately, to override, to disrupt, but he knew that rash moves could trigger fail-safes, endangering Lena or destroying the evidence they needed. Mara's voice cut through the tension. We have one chance. We can trigger a systemic overload, force the archive to redirect power, and create a temporal blind spot. It's risky. One misstep and Lena, or all of us. Her words trailed off, leaving the unspoken possibility of failure lingering in the air like static. Daniel's mind raced. The experiment had trained him, manipulated him, dissected him, but now he could fight back, not only for survival, but for agency. He initiated the sequence, every keystroke a deliberate defiance of the system's predictions. The screens flickered violently, data streams scrambled, algorithms faltering under the sudden perturbation. Yet the archive responded, adaptive, its predictive mechanisms adjusting faster than anticipated, countering, probing, forcing moral and tactical decisions at a pace that pushed their endurance to the limit. Alarms blared, mechanical locks engaged, neural tracking signals pulsed through hidden sensors, and the team felt the tangible pressure of the experiment pressing in on all sides. Lena's location feed flickered, indicating imminent transfer or confinement. Daniel had to decide: continue the overload, risking destruction of critical evidence and potential harm, or modify the plan to prioritize Lena, possibly allowing the archive to retain operational control. The moral dilemma was immediate, unavoidable, crushing. He adjusted the sequence, redirecting energy flows to create a temporary override in the node controlling Lena's environment, his hands trembling as he calculated risk, probability, and ethical consequence simultaneously. Mara's voice was steady, a lifeline in the chaos. Trust the sequence. You've anticipated their moves. Now force them to anticipate yours. The central hub seemed to respond, the lights dimming, screens blanking, as if the archive itself paused, recalibrating in the face of human defiance. Every second stretched, tension accumulating to a crescendo that gripped their consciousness. And then, the critical moment arrived. Lena appeared on the feed, free from isolation, moving toward the central node, unrestrained but wary. Daniel's relief was tempered by the knowledge that the experiment was far from neutralized. The system could still adapt, counteract, or manipulate further. They had created a temporary blind spot, a narrow window in which agency could be reclaimed, yet the consequences of each action remained profound. Daniel reached the final override panel, entering the last sequence, committing their collective decision to challenge the archive directly. The hub's systems resisted, warning signals and error codes flashing across the interface, yet the coordinated effort of experience, insider knowledge, and psychological anticipation prevailed. For a moment, silence engulfed them. The screens went dark, the hum of the system quieted, and Daniel felt the heavy release of tension. But clarity was partial. The archive's architecture was vast, its influence pervasive, and while immediate danger had been mitigated, the long-term consequences remained uncertain. Lena joined him at the control console, eyes wide, breath ragged. "We did it, but at what cost?" she whispered, her voice carrying both awe and fear. Mara nodded, her expression guarded. "We've won the moment, but the system is still alive. It adapts, evolves, learns from our resistance. We've forced it to react, but we cannot dismantle it entirely, at least not yet." Daniel realized then that the climax was both victory and revelation. They had confronted the core of manipulation, tested their limits, and asserted agency, yet the moral and psychological ramifications extended beyond the immediate triumph. Choices made, risks taken, and ethical boundaries stretched could not be undone. They would carry consequences for themselves and others indefinitely. The hub's data revealed insights into the archive's mechanisms, behavioral models, and ethical manipulations, illuminating the extent of societal influence and psychological engineering. Daniel understood that the confrontation was not merely about personal survival. It was a confrontation with the nature of control itself, with the ethical dimensions of observation and influence on human behavior. As the lights of the central hub flickered back to normal, a final message appeared on the main screen, and signed, enigmatic. "The experiment evolves. You have altered its trajectory, but the questions remain. How far will you go to preserve freedom, and at what cost?" Daniel, Lena, and Mara exchanged glances, understanding that the climax was complete yet unresolved. The high stakes had been navigated, the confrontation survived, yet the philosophical and moral consequences lingered, a pulse beneath the surface of every decision, every thought, every action that would follow. They had faced the archive and emerged intact, yet the experiment had left its mark, embedding questions that would not fade, moral and psychological dilemmas that would haunt them indefinitely. The climax had tested courage, strategy, and ethics simultaneously, delivering both triumph and profound reflection, leaving them with the chilling awareness that agency, freedom, and morality were fragile constructs, perpetually tested in the crucible of observation and control. The central hub now lay behind them, its lights dimmed, screens blank, yet the presence of the archive lingered like an invisible weight pressing against their consciousness. Daniel, Lena, and Mara had survived the confrontation, reclaimed temporary agency, and disrupted the predictive system, but the victory felt partial, fragile, and unsettling. Outside, the city continued, indifferent, unaware of the ethical and psychological battles waged in its shadowed corridors. Daniel walked alongside Lena, the quiet hum of the evening punctuated only by distant traffic and faint sirens, each step heavy with reflection. They had altered the trajectory of the experiment, yet understanding the full scope remained impossible. The archive's influence stretched beyond immediate observation, embedding itself subtly within society, shaping choices and influencing perception in ways humans could never fully measure. Mara, quieter now, considered the implications aloud. "We've survived, yes, but the system evolves. Each disruption we create teaches it new pathways, new anticipations. Control is never eliminated. It adapts, anticipates, and integrates resistance." The words hung in the air, unsettling in their clarity. Daniel felt the weight of moral responsibility, realizing that even their most ethical actions carried consequences beyond intention. Every choice during the confrontation, every maneuver to protect or deceive, rippled outward, affecting others whose lives they could not predict or control. As they reviewed the extracted data, patterns of manipulation emerged not only in the experiment's design, but in society itself. The archive had leveraged subtle psychological nudges to shape behavior, social compliance, and moral compromise on a systemic level. The realization was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The experiment's reach extended into cultural norms, legal systems, and interpersonal relationships, creating a web of influence that could not be entirely severed. Yet within this gravity lay clarity. Daniel understood that while the archive could never be completely dismantled, the assertion of agency, ethical reflection, and deliberate choice created spaces of resistance. Individuals, though observed and predicted, remained capable of moral discernment, courageous defiance, and meaningful action. The collapse, the confrontation, and the recovery had forged this understanding, embedding resilience, insight, and responsibility into their consciousness. Days passed, marked by careful review, emotional recovery, and strategic reflection. Daniel noticed subtle changes in himself, vigilance tempered by patience, fear moderated by awareness, and moral sensitivity sharpened by the extreme pressures of the experiment. Lena, too, carried marks of the ordeal, quiet moments of introspection, sudden flashes of doubt, and renewed determination to act ethically even under observation. Mara, ever cautious, emphasized the long-term implications. "We cannot undo the experiment," she said. "We can only learn, adapt, and influence future outcomes. That is the true measure of agency." And so they began a new rhythm, monitoring the archive at a distance, maintaining operational secrecy, and studying patterns of influence to anticipate potential threats. Their focus was no longer survival alone, but the preservation of ethical integrity in a system designed to erode it. Yet, even in these measured routines, the archive remained an omnipresent question mark, a silent observer whose attention and predictions could never be fully known. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across empty streets, Daniel paused, reflecting on the moral and philosophical consequences of their journey. The confrontation had taught him that freedom was not absolute, that choice carried weight beyond immediate perception, and that ethical action demanded both courage and restraint. The city's hum seemed distant yet omnipresent, a reminder of the subtle manipulations embedded in daily life. In the quiet, he contemplated the archive's ultimate purpose, not simply to observe, not merely to predict, but to test the resilience, morality, and emotional capacity of humanity. And he realized that in surviving, disrupting, and asserting agency, they had fulfilled a crucial function, proving that human consciousness, even under extreme pressure and ethical uncertainty, could navigate complexity, resist manipulation, and act with moral intent. The resolution, therefore, was not a final victory, but a profound understanding. The experiment's presence remained, its influence persistent, yet within the framework of observation lay the enduring potential for choice, reflection, and ethical action. Daniel, Lena, and Mara would carry the lessons forward, aware that every decision, every interaction, and every act of courage or restraint was part of a continuing moral dialogue with a system designed to challenge them. The final scene found them standing together atop a rooftop overlooking the city, lights flickering below, shadows stretching across facades like a reminder of observation, prediction, and ethical consequence. Daniel turned to Lena and Mara, eyes reflecting both fatigue and resolve. "We've survived, but the questions remain," he said softly. "What do we do with freedom when it's measured? How do we act when every choice is watched, predicted, and interpreted?" Lena's gaze met his, unwavering yet reflective. "We act with awareness," she replied. "We choose, we reflect, we bear responsibility, and we accept that uncertainty is part of our moral existence." Mara nodded, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips. "And we remain vigilant, not against each other, but against the system's attempt to define who we are through observation alone." The wind stirred around them, carrying a subtle chill that mirrored the lingering tension of their journey. They stood together, aware of the archive's pervasive reach, yet strengthened by the knowledge that agency, ethical reflection, and conscious action persisted even under scrutiny. And as the city's lights flickered and shadows shifted, Daniel understood that the resolution was not closure, but awareness, a philosophical reckoning with the tension between observation, control, and moral agency, leaving them, and the audience, with lingering questions, profound reflection, and the weight of choice in a world designed to manipulate perception and test human resilience. The month of confrontation, collapse, and revelation had ended, yet the moral and psychological echoes would persist indefinitely, a testament to the enduring struggle between autonomy, observation, and ethical responsibility.